Hey guys, welcome back to the Book Haven with Rachel and Raven. Grab a cup of something yummy and let's get this episode started. Hey guys, welcome back. This week we're going to start off with our bookish question. So, my question is, what's your first book that you read that you remember reading by yourself, a chapter book? And we're going to evolve from that question and kind of go through our reading journey and how we've gotten to the books and um, different genres we like to read now. So, Raven, what is the book that you remember reading?
The earliest book that I can remember reading is the Little House on the Prairie series. I remember just that was like talked about so much, and then I read the books on my own. I loved them, I devoured them, and I even have a little doll that my aunt made me, and it's my little Laura doll. Um, And what's really interesting is that I tried to read those with my children and it just did not work. So that's kind of funny. But that was the first set of books that I couldn't put down. Um, but yeah,
Did
like,
did you
go ahead.
read the Little Bridges as well, like that series, or
As a
just Little
kid,
House? Yeah.
no, just Little House as a kid. And I think then I kind of went on from there. There wasn't really a reading. There was a reading culture in my home, but there kind of wasn't as far as reading good quality books. So I read some Goosebumps. I know I'm talking about Goosebumps, but I read like Babysitter's Club. Um, Boxcar Children, that was a fun one. I remember kind of just really devouring those books. And then when I hit my teens, just talking about like my journey of reading and the things that I remember reading. When I hit my teens, I started reading Jeanette Oak books. So, like Christian romance. That's kind of where I would classify those as. And I devoured those books. Like Love's Enduring Promise and Love Comes Softly. Like I devoured all of that series of books. And that was way before the movies came out. There's movies now. Um, and several of like her stories that took place in Canada. So I kind of went through that phase of reading. So really in my childhood and teens, like I never really read classic literature. I don't really remember reading really old books at all. We did have a series of books, and they were like these, they were really, really, really abridged. Um, I guess classic books, but I don't count those as like I read these like Moby Dick or any of those because they were so abridged. They were so dumbed down that I don't even count them. But I read some of those. So I had the idea of what the story was, but now looking back, I'm like, wow, those were really, really terribly done. I did read The Hiding Place. Did I read The Hiding? No, I read like it wasn't The Hiding Place, but it was like a story about Corey Ten Boom. I remember reading that, and I remember that story really sucked me in. Um, I loved reading that. And then as I got older, like an adult, I really kind of quit reading. Um, Aside from like, I would read a lot of self help from time to time. I would pick self help books up. Um, and then I got married and I still like called myself a reader, right? I still identified as a reader, but I definitely was not reading um like a lot of great books at all. It would be like just self-help books, books on marriage or whatever. And then I got pregnant and still I wasn't reading a whole lot. Like parenting books, devotional. Um, but even that, like now to think of it, like I go back and think of how many days I went without reading and how I will never get that time back. And
Yeah.
that's so sad. Um, and then I probably I would say in the last 10 years with homeschooling my children, that became a huge focal point of our homeschooling was reading really great books. Um, but even then, like I would read aloud to my kids and we would read really great books. But I think it wasn't until about 2020 that I really got serious about um, making that really a huge priority. Um, is that I wanted our family, I could see the bond that we were making over really great books. Actually, I would say 2019. 2019, you and I started kind of reading together. And I think that's when I took off reading a lot more fiction, um, and really enjoying that again. Um, yeah. And so I would say that even through that, like well, actually, sorry, let me back up. I'm so sorry. There was a time when all my kids were small and I had decided I was going to pick up reading again, like reading fiction. And I went back down the reading of Christian romance novels. And it was like I don't even know who the author is, but she wrote books that were set like in the Amish country. Um, And so I devoured a lot of those books. And during that time, I read Redeeming Love by Francine Rivers. This might be controversial, so hold on to
Buckle
your,
up.
but yeah, buckle up. And here's the thing, like when I read it that time, I really, really loved it. I really loved the book. I thought it was beautiful, right? Like all these things. And then, um, you know, there was kind of a little lag in me reading a whole lot. Like I would read things here and there. But then around, I don't know, maybe it was actually 2018, 2019, somewhere in there is when I really started picking up and really devouring really great books. And a lot of that had to do with kind of wanting to stay ahead of the game, um, for what my kids were reading. And we started reading really great books as a family. Um, well, through that process, I started being able to differentiate books that were really good. And I don't know how I would say this, but like books that were better for me. Um, and the type of books that I like, the quality of writing that I appreciate. Um, and you can only do that by reading really great quality books before you can actually see like those Christian romance novels that I was reading. Like I would never pick that up now. And not because they were terrible, terrible books. It's just even the writing quality is different, I think, than what I read now. And also my interests has changed and like, I don't know, like life experience and things like that. So I I don't know. I choose the type of books that I choose now. Um, one, I want them to be edifying, and two, I want them to be good, like good writing, not just a good story, but good quality writing. If I'm going to take the time to read the book, um, does that make
Yeah.
sense? Am I
Oh,
making
yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then I also want to challenge myself to read more classical books because it's such a good exercise for your brain. There's a lot to reading classical literature. There's a lot of scientific proof of all that happens like in your brain and how good that is just for your reading life. And so that is one reason now like I choose to incorporate things that are a little bit more challenging for me to read. Um, And
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before, but even rereading books um, is so good for just building fluency and what do you call it? Vocabulary and reading something that's a little bit more challenging. Anyways, I read Jane Eyre every year, and that's one of the reasons I do that. Um, because people don't write like that anymore. They don't talk like that anymore, and I think it's just a really good um, way to exercise my brain. I have that landmark in my year or whatever to, you know, read at least that classical book. If I don't read another one the entire year, at least I know that I did read that one. But I do try to get to a few different classical books. But just reading better books, I look back over my years of reading and I can see the evolution of how I got to where I'm at today and how I really do appreciate reading so much more today than I did. So I
Which
don't
is an
know.
interesting, just listening to you talk, it's an interesting correlation of like the harder and more challenging you challenge yourself, right, with quality of books, um, makes you appreciate reading more than when you're just reading when you were reading stuff that was very easy and, whatever, not so great writing, um,
Yeah.
and you didn't appreciate it more. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I love a good challenge. And it just feels like a huge accomplishment when you read
Yeah.
Jane Austen. It feels like such an accomplishment that you read it, you get the references, like you understand, when things are dropped into movies or whatever about certain characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that too, there's a reason why these books are still being promoted for people to read, right? Like in
Mhm.
school settings and stuff like that. Like you have, um, because it is making your brain think differently. Even I think it's totally separate from how like, you're reading like old English and stuff like that. Um, but just it makes you think so much more.
Mhm. Yeah. I think we live in a culture that everything is so instant. It's instant gratification, right? At every turn. And I really enjoy having to slow down. Yeah, just the countercultural of the instant gratification, but reading something that challenges me and makes me slow down, makes my brain slow down because think of how much we're doing all of the time. And when you sit down and read a classical book, or maybe not even a classical book, but something that's a little bit more challenging to read. I'm thinking of All the Light We Cannot See. That's a little bit more of a work of your brain to
Yeah.
follow his writing. Um, it forces me to slow down. And I think that I just think that's so good. That's really good for us in the fast paced world that we live in.
Yeah.
So, what about you? What book got you going? And what was your journey like?
So, I think that my first chapter book that I remember reading, was Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. And I can remember reading that book and just feeling so seen. Um, I actually tried to reread it a few years ago because I was like gonna give it to my daughter to read, and I was like, "Oh my word, I cannot believe that my mother let me read this." Um, but, uh, I don't know, it just spoke to me. So, I would say that's probably the first book that I remember love reading and feeling like I really related to the characters and stuff like that. Um, and just so for me growing up, I am dyslexic, and so reading was always hard. It was very, very hard. So, it would take me a long time to read books, so I didn't consume a lot of books. Um which I think kind of helped in me, like, getting picky about, like, what am I gonna actually spend my time reading because it was so challenging. But,
Yeah.
as I got older, I would say when I got to high school, I really started, um, reading more books just for the fun of it besides school books. So, I started I tried to do Lord of the Rings then, but I was not able to. I loved A Walk to Remember. Um, and then I didn't so much care for any of his other books, but I really liked that one. I started reading Harry Potter. Um, and then I was in like, I don't know if you'd call it honors English, but like AP English. And so we were reading a lot of the classics. I fell in love with A Tale of Two Cities my sophomore year. Um, and so just started picking up those kinds of books more.
Yeah.
But then, when I got married and had kids and, I really reverted to read, um, young adult, um, like fantasy, sci-fi, dystopia I really love dystopia. Um, and kind of went down that whole rabbit hole. I read so many books when my kids were little. Um, when they're napping or when they're
Mhm.
watching some annoying show that I had, didn't want to watch, I would read my book. And like Twilight, you name it. If it was a young adult book
It's
and
okay.
like
This is a safe place,
yeah.
Rachel.
And like, what do you even call it? The 2010s? If it came out then or a little bit before, odds are I have read it and I could talk to you about it. But which has actually paid off in spades because I have a lot of people ask me like, "Hey, is this book good okay for my teenager?" But,
Mhm.
um, I really went down that rabbit hole just because and I do think there are seasons where sometimes you just need like, I'm
Yeah.
just reading because I can't just fully process all the things that are going on all the time. And
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay to have seasons
Mhm.
where you just like, I'm just vegging out on this ridiculous stuff, and enjoying that and stuff. But then I think once my kids were old enough, and like you said, I would like to know if you homeschool, like, did your reading style change? Because I feel like a lot of people's it does. But once
Yeah.
my kids started reading more challenging books, and I was reading it with them, I started, like you said, kind of recognizing the beauty in these kind of I don't know. I don't even know what you would call it because my family still enjoys a good fantasy novel.
Yeah.
Um, but and there's merit in those books as well. So we're not painting like a whole genre as like, whatever. But
Right. Yeah.
um there is a difference in quality of certain books. And when you challenge yourself to read and even styles of books that you don't really like we've already talked about the writing styles that we don't like, but I still challenge myself to read those styles of books because
Mhm.
it's working my brain. Um, and spurring me to, better myself, even when it's just a book. And I think maybe sometimes people like to kind of downplay reading. It's just a hobby. It's just for fun, and it is. There is um, a place for that for sure, and that's one of the things that's good about reading. But you can also grow so much
Yeah.
from reading good books. So and
I
again,
agree.
good books is defined by, you as a person, as an individual. Um, but I would say that, like, we started reading a whole bunch of historical fiction, which I'm pretty sure I don't even remember. I wonder if All the Light You Cannot See is the first historical book that I read, like historical fiction. Um,
Really?
it might have been. I can't remember now, um, but I was like, "What?" Like, I had no idea the genre even existed, and I really went down the rabbit hole of that, and some of those books aren't super great either,
Yes, true.
um, but you end up learning a lot. So, I have learned so much history just because of reading a book and going, "Did that really happen?" And then going down a rabbit hole of trying to figure out, like, what was the actual historical event
Yeah.
that they're referring to. Um and different people's, like, the way different people have lived and stuff like that. So I think there is a place for um reading books, and I still every once in a while, probably more often than, whatever, I do just need a good book that has no, like, it's just fluff, just so
Yeah.
that my brain can have some space of, like, not worrying about my life right now, kinda thing. Um, and so I think it's good to sprinkle those in, but I also think that it's good to sprinkle in books that maybe you wouldn't necessarily pick up, but you're challenging yourself to read a different kind of book, genre, classic, like, whatever your goal is, make a goal
Yeah.
and go for it.
That's really
So,
good. Yeah.
yeah, so that would be my so that's my reading journey. I definitely, there have been years where I think in 2020, I think maybe both of us read like 100 books, and
We
then
read a lot of books that year.
which
We
that was
were
the
really
season.
trying to escape something. I'm not sure what it was.
It was a season, and now, like, I just met my goal of, like, 50 for the year. Like, it's 100 is not gonna happen this year, and that's fine. If your goal is 10 and you meet that goal, that's awesome. Like, you're still challenging yourself to read. Um, and if it's one book, like, you keep challenging yourself. If it's one book this year, then make it 2 next year. Like, just
Yeah.
keep pursuing it, even if it's not, maybe, like, you're all the time feeling it kinda thing.
Yeah. And I would say too, like if you're going to challenge yourself with a harder book, a book that's a new genre for you, or just it's going to be more challenging for you, is one, just set small daily goals. Like the first time I read Jane Eyre, I just committed that I was one, I wanted to finish it in the month of January. That was my goal. And then two, just that I would pick it up every day, and read a little bit, and to just keep going, even if I didn't finish it in January, that I was just going to keep going until I did finish it, and not putting, not that you have to like also either, just read this new thing only, have another book going that's a little bit easier for you. But,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're challenging yourself with, just be gentle with yourself because it is hard, especially when you're, jumping into just whether it's historical fiction or memoirs or whatever it is that you, um, want to grow in. Just pace yourself because it does take time.
Yeah.
We actually have we're supposed to, we haven't picked it yet, or maybe we did pick it and I'm not remembering, but we try to read a new Dickens book, right? Every winter, around the winter time, around December.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we forgot about this.
Well, we'll have to announce it here when we decide on which one. I think, was it last summer that I did David Copperfield? Last
Yeah,
winter, maybe.
yeah,
Did you
and
read that
I
one?
don't know, I feel like I did a different one,
Okay.
but
But so that was what I was going to say as well, is if you there's it's almost like when you go to, like, do anything, right? When you go to lose weight, when you go to,
yeah,
hold yourself accountable for anything, it's always better and more fun when you get more people involved.
it's
So,
true.
whether that's a book club or, just having one friend, read it with you, or you could, like, put on in the YouTube comment, "I'm gonna challenge myself to read this," and we will ask you about it. Like, sometimes just saying it out loud to somebody else holds you accountable
Yeah,
enough to where you can, get it done and be realistic with, like, your time commitments and stuff, because you don't wanna be like,
yeah,
"Oh, I didn't get it, and now I'm just throwing it out." Um, but yeah, you can, and don't forget, like, you can do audiobooks are great
mhm,
for more challenging books. I know for myself, audiobooks have really helped me get through some ones that would be hard because I'm dyslexic, and so it takes me a long time to read, um, certain styles of writing, and, like, fonts bother me as well.
yeah,
So,
and I would say that even too, like, with the classics, doing the audiobook, with them, while reading along, and don't be too hard on yourself. Just keep going. That was the biggest thing for me, is just to keep going.
Yeah. So I think the challenge that we should leave our listeners with is, if you notice that all of the books you're reading are the same type of book, or if the covers all look the same.
Yes.
World War II, Annette and I used to have this thing where we would go to the bookstore and send like just pictures of all of the different historical fiction. The World War II ones are classic for, it's a lady on the cover and she's facing away. Like, so you just see the back and then there's
Yes.
planes or something in the background, but it's always a lady not facing the cover of the book. But if you notice that all of your books have very similar covers and they're all very similar stories, we would just challenge you to pick up something from a different genre. It doesn't have to be classical, but something from a different genre, and challenge yourself to kind of step away from your usual go-to books and challenge
Mhm.
yourself to read something different and see what happens.
You might not get the whole story the first go around on the in like if you pick up a classic. I remember with Jane Eyre, I remember thinking, what in the world is happening in this story?
I still think that when I read it.
Well, you haven't read it enough times yet. Just kidding. Just yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
well,
I like
we'll
that.
have I'll have to include this joke in here too, though. But I was having this conversation with my son, and we were talking about, I can't even remember what it was, but somehow Raven came up, and he was like, "Ugh, I just can't even." She reads Jane Eyre, like, and loves that book, like, because he had to read
Yes.
it last year, and he was like, "So what? She likes that book?"
I'll text him in January and say, "Hey, you gonna
Guess what
read
I'm
Jane
reading?
Eyre with me?"
No, once was enough for his lifetime, is what
Oh,
he said.
I
So
know what I was gonna say when you were talking about reading slow, or I think a lot of people have this misconception about people who are readers that, I mean, and there are some readers who are speed readers. They can read really fast and they read a lot of books, right?
yeah,
Um, but I think for me, I am a slow reader. I don't have dyslexia, but I'm a slow reader. If I'm picking up a book, um, I am a slow reader. I think a lot of people think that because I read a lot of books that I'm naturally just this very fast reader. I'm a read every single word on the page kind of reader.
yeah.
If you look at different types of people, that's the kind of reader I am. But I was going to say that audiobooks has really helped me, um, even if I'm not like reading the hardback, but it's not every reader is a fast reader. And yeah, just that encouragement that if you're not a fast reader, it's okay.
Well, and I think people think that, oh, well, if reading doesn't come easy to me, then I'm not a reader. That's not true
Yeah.
either. Everybody can
Yeah.
be a reader. You just have to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and in our culture of just being on a screen or have the movie or whatever, I mean, think about not even that long ago, 100 years ago, the only way to consume a story was to read it.
Yeah.
So, and again, like, people, not everyone back in the day, read and had access to books even, but that was the way you had to consume a story. If you wanted a story, I guess somebody could tell you a story too, but we have just gotten so, I think, lackadaisical about, well, I'll just watch the movie.
Yeah.
So,
I did have a question about Walk to Remember. Did you watch the movie first or read the book first?
I I'm pretty sure I read the book first.
Well,
I
this
might
is a
have read
momentous
I
occasion.
I might have read the book because I knew there was a movie coming out. I can't quite remember. But I don't know. I could have watched the movie and then read the book. The book is different than the movie.
Yeah, it is.
Um, the book is so good if you haven't read that one. And I have already, like, my daughter has read that one and she's 14. I'm pretty sure she read it last year when she was 13. So, it's very, I think, PG. Um, but it's been a long time, so don't quote me on that, but I have let my daughter read it.
I think it's
Um,
pretty PG. I
yeah,
actually, yeah, I'm pretty sure I gave it to mine and she read it. But
yeah,
yeah, it is different than the movie, although I think because I saw the movie first, because see, this was in my period of life that I wasn't reading very much. So I
yeah.
watched the movie in the theaters when it came out, and I didn't even know there was a book until I think you told me. And then I read that
Wow,
book a
really?
couple of years ago. Yeah,
So the copy I still have my original copy that I had from high school, and it
I know I
has
borrowed it.
it has the movie. It's the movie edition, which is so cringe, but it has the movie, people on the front of it.
That's a whole
I know.
podcast in itself. It's like, can we please leave the covers of books
Movie
alone?
tie-ins. But, so I definitely read it when the movie was coming out, whether it was before or after, I couldn't say.
Okay.
But to me, this like, I just loved that story because at the time, I was in high school. I was in a relationship with my now husband. We're high school sweethearts, and so I just loved that it validated that, your high school love is real.
Yeah.
And, because so much of this could be a whole 'nother thing too, but going down a rabbit hole, but it really makes me sad when, especially nowadays stuff bashes the high school romance as just being like, well, it just is, and then you move on. Um, because that's not like our love was real. We
Yeah.
got married, and thankfully it will be 20 years next year. Um that we've
Wow.
been married, but it was just so nice to read and it be valid that that relationship was true, true love and whatever you wanna call it. So, I think that's why I liked that so much, but that one definitely got me going reading other things, besides just school books and stuff like that, um, and that's kind of when I picked up Harry Potter too.
All right, guys, we've come to the end of another episode. I hope that you are encouraged to read something new, to challenge yourself by pulling yourself out of a reading rut if that's where you're at. But mainly just that you would be encouraged to read. And we just appreciate each and every one of you who listen, who subscribe, who give a thumbs up, who comment, just interacting with us. We really do appreciate it. You guys make this so much more fun when we get to actually have conversations about an episode or about something that we've read, um, either through social media or just even in real life. So we love you guys and yay for reading. You can cut that.
I liked it.
Maybe.
I'm
Oh,
leaving it. Okay, I'm gonna
I'm
stop it.
terrible. Okay.